Hello and welcome back. We're talking about Feast and why it's awesome. In particular, we're looking at this build order that's really thin, is the way I would describe it. And in general, when I use the word thin, I mean it just barely has enough defense at key times. I'm actually gonna shut my door because apparently there's people in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, my ass. Yeah. So let's say, for instance, you're a Terran player who's struggling with some early roach pressure. A more, like a sort of solid defense would be to just build the bunker up early. Or someone who's doing a thin defense would just early plant their supply depots in positions where they could micro around with their Marines and SCVs if need be. It requires a lot of control, a lot of focus, a lot of preparation. Very easy to lose when you have thin defenses set up, but when they work well, that is the foundation of the most epic of builds. So we're going to go through and just pick apart Feast's opening at every phase and talk about what the dangers are, what the risks are, and even consider some things like what if he wasn't up against a fast layering zerg? What if he was up against a more traditional 3 hatching zerg? So let's start things off. Yeah. Oh, listen to that music and that sound that I have on. Perfect. So anyways, Feast starts off, and I think does the usual thing. Sends this probe down to build the pylon. However, interestingly, already we see a little bit of optimization going on. Not sending a probe out to scout. Actually bringing it back. This will actually gain you about... a probe mines at a rate of about 40 minerals a minute. And if you imagine buying yourself just a little bit more time, like this pylon was started very close to the 1 minute mark, so we'll just round to that. So if this guy mines for an extra minute, or maybe 90 seconds, an extra little bit of time, that is enough for us to, say, get another assimilator when we didn't used to be able to. So there's all those chrono boostings. So once again, we've gone about a minute without having a probe scouted. So we've already gained about 40 minerals. It's not super important that you think in these terms while you're playing. But in terms of like adjusting a build order, you'd say, well, maybe I can actually send my dude out more at this time or that or the other. So this is a 15 Nexus followed by a 16 Forge. It might be 17. Maybe I'm misremembering. I'm pretty sure it's 16. There it is. So immediately, you might say to yourself, well, gosh, doesn't this seem risky? Isn't this a problem? Very often people will see builds like this and talk about, oh, metagame, this, that. He must have a read that his opponent is in 6 pooling. How can he know that? He would insta-lose in that sort of spot. However, do note that because of this formation, you can wall this off completely with a gateway and a pylon. This is very, very easy to wall off in the midst of any sort of very, very early pressure. On other maps, you need some 3x3 or 4x4 buildings, like gateways or cybernetics cores. Excuse me. As opposed to the small 2x2 pylon. So already, Feast is... Technically, there is a little bit of a risk, but it's not as risky as, say, doing this on Acheron Wastes or doing this on Daybreak. On Daybreak, you don't have the luxury of that very tiny wall-off. You need many structures to do a wall-off on Daybreak. On this one, exactly 3. So we will then also note that this probe begins his move out at around the 3-minute mark. So that's 2 full extra minutes of mining that we got out of a probe. That's almost enough to build an extra pylon or a zealot or what have you. And we do see that pylon go down. So there it is. There's the completed wall off at the front with the gateway going down. There's this little slit right here. But again, if need be, you can just do some adjustments. Or wait, did he... Am I thinking of this differently? No. Okay, yeah, it is the one slit. You can just get the wall off there with another pylon. I'm kind of the opinion that this gateway should be scooted a little bit back just to make sure that we can wall off. And then scoot this pylon just a little bit back, but either way, Scout's the first most important thing to be able to say, okay, alright, there's no expand going down here. Or, excuse me, there is an expand going down here. Okay, there's no expand going down there. And also doing some very clever just saving up of the chrono boost to make sure that all these various pieces are set up. And this is one of these calculated risk things. Well, I mean, if we don't see a third, and it's sort of implied our opponent hasn't taken one yet via this drone, we kind of do want to make sure that we get our photon cannon up as fast as possible. Did he do it like that? Did he build the cannon first? I'm pretty sure he built the cannon first. Okay, yeah. He built the cannon first. Many people have a tendency to just flood the double gas instantly, like right away. But he's just being slightly more conservative with that. Just getting one at a time as he has the funds to. Continuing to check, just back and forth like this. So, here's a couple of questions. What are the possible threats that we can lose to early game with a build like this? Well, I mean, ordinarily, he would have a third base up, and we could maybe exploit that by some sort of early gateway aggression like Zealot Stalker, Mothership Core. But because we're up against, it appears to be a two-basing player. There's a lot of things like Roach all-ins, Ling Baneling all-ins, and Feast has an interesting answer prepared for all of that. So Feast got himself a very fast gateway. Normally, I would call a fast gateway one that goes down by 320 or 330. A gateway takes about a minute to build. So we're actually seeing that this gateway is finishing up right at 430. This was a very early gateway. This started at 320 or so. More of a calmer gateway timing would be around 350 or 4 minutes. This would be if you were probably going sentry or focusing on getting your probes up earlier. That's when you'd focusing on a more economic strategy as opposed to like a, ooh, I need Stargates really, really, really fast. However, with this timing, Feast is able to get up a cybernetics core quite swiftly. And we're actually seeing him cut probes to be able to get this down. Now again, if 330 is a pretty early gateway timing, 430 is a pretty early cybernetics core timing. And I'll note one last thing. By killing off these rocks, what are some all-ins we could lose to? Well, maybe a Ling run-in, maybe some sort of Roach run-in. Well, if we kill off this rock, we can actually plant a structure here that walls this part off. So killing this rock is actually an essential defensive maneuver. This cybernetics core in a very nice defensive position. We can go pylon, pylon, wall off, or pylon, pylon here. Very little, but very, very important. Main base, 3 in each gas geyser. All the chrono boost going to the probes. Now, as he's cutting back and forth and all this jazz, wow, still not seeing anything. Ah, geez. Still not seeing speed. Still just chrono boosting the probes out. All the minerals are being conserved for what? Getting up a Stargate as ridiculously fast as possible. So, here it is. Stargate before Warp Gate. Now, I'm not a scientist enough to know if that walls. I'm pretty sure that does on that side. I don't think it does here. But again, still. The whole notion of the defensive positioning is still there. Pylon to wall off, pylon, pylon. Makes it quite nice. And there's the O. Now here is another freaking, I honestly would say borderline psychopathic maneuver. Double gas at 545. This is an insane amount of gas that Feast is getting early. And why is this technically okay? Because almost 100% of the chrono boost has been spent on the Nexuses. And I say almost because part of me wants to say, well, maybe it could have been done on something else. But no, now that I think about it, 100% have gone down on this. And there is now a sentry coming up, or at least there should be. Come on. There's the sentry. Now, this sort of issue could be abated by a little bit of building placement. For instance, this Stargate being flushed down at the bottom. That's the sort of adjustment that fixes this. It's very easy to go, okay, well, a Zealot would be a solid defense. But again, we want to focus on our thin defenses today. So it's a really magnificent set of building placement that Feast has set up for himself to actually allow himself the ability to wall off that bottom side. But dang, man, all Chrono Boost thus far has been spent on the probes. Now, if 3:30 is an early time to start a gateway, then 4:30 is an early time to start a core, then 5:30 is an early time to start a Stargate, which means that 6:30 is a very early time to get yourself up a Void Ray. If, for some reason, Feast was up against some sort of 3-basing Zerg, a more traditional Stefano-esque Zerg play, then Feast could easily begin getting Phoenixes and exploit what? Exploit how low the opponent likely is on tech. The opponent, if he goes for early 3 hatch, probably only has queens and spores to defend himself. There's a lot of overlords to pick off, a lot of drones to pick off. Phoenixes are going to work very well. Void Rays are going to work terribly against a strong enough Zerg player who knows how to do his positioning and stuff like that. But against this player, well, he probably delayed his 3rd base. So that means that a Void Ray does 2 things. One, a Void Ray will help us hold off any all-in. A lot of all-ins will strike around 7 minutes, and we'll have our Void Ray almost done. And we'll have 1 sentry force field. This is the all-in answer for Feast build, as well as this building positioning. And if our opponent has a late 3rd, we might even be able to pick that 3rd off. Or hell, if our opponent goes all in and we stay alive, this Void Ray will allow us to deny a 3rd to someone who did do an all-in play. So let's talk about some things that we can exploit, shall we? What are we doing to get our edge? Well, certainly Void Rays will allow us to kill off overlords and all this, that, and the other. A nice little pro block at the front while this sentry pulls back down, and a 2nd sentry incoming. But in general, a player who goes for a traditional 3-base play is going to have a lot of larvae, and therefore will be doing things like getting a lot of lings, a lot of roaches, a lot of these larva expensive units. And this is obviously because, well, for one, they have 3 hatches, but they can build so many drones early that they hit the money number of drones, and then they just devote all the rest of the larvae to units. If an opponent goes for 2 hatch, he can go for some drones, maybe get to 44 or 50, and then he's going to have to do something like get infestors or hydras to deal with whatever problems at hand, and then he wants to go back to droning. So there's not going to really be massling roach that we have to face if we're against a 2-hatching player. To summarize what I said, against a 3-hatching player, Ling Roach is a lot bigger of a threat because he's just going to have more larvae around the 9-10 minute mark. If we're against a 2-hatching player, he's just not really going to have as much larvae. He might have hydras pretty quick in low numbers, but he can't have a lot of roaches and a lot of hydras. In other words, it's a little bit of high-tech stuff in the 2-hatch case, or a lot of low-tech stuff in the 3-hatch case. Those are really the 2 broad situations that we're worried about. So this Void Ray is to sort of tease and encourage the Zerg. Come on, I know you want to get your roachy stuff up. Or I know you want to get your Hydra stuff up. Don't build roach. Killing off these overlords, a huge pain to deal with. Instant robotics facility. 7:30 is finally not a really early time to get a robo facility. Whew! Finally got to stop saying how early everything was. Yeah, this is a pretty typical time for a robotics facility. Accelerated given what Feast has done, but he's going to get himself just enough stuff. Gateways, this robo, and this very particularly timed mothership core. Has spent pretty much no minerals in a big capacity other than on this Void Ray. Everything else has been gas expenditures. Everything sort of explodes into motion. right around the 8-minute mark. There we go. Gonna lock that chair into place. So as a general rule, the instant a mothership core finishes, if you start a Nexus when the mothership core finishes, then the mothership core will have enough energy to do the photon overcharge on the Nexus the moment it finishes. Picking off overlords, being as annoying as possible, encouraging two things. One, for Bly to be more defensive with his vision, to not be as bold and move out into the middle of the map to capture sight of things. But also to encourage the opponent to get some anti-air up. Now, having done similar builds like this, Feast is pretty much guaranteed to instantly Colossus, no matter what he sees, to go instant Colossus. And in fact, this is a very telling thing. He moved up here and saw no drones, and saw a pretty good amount of creep spread. This is the sort of thing that kind of makes you go, well, that means the hatch has been done a while, but you haven't even sent any drones to it. So here's the last expenditure. There's the instant Colossus going down as these gateways finish up. And you'll notice Feast has still not spent his minerals on any units. This is the only really mineral-heavy unit. This is a gas-heavy unit. This is gas-heavy. This is gas-heavy. Just spending it on minerals. And then this very particular placement to allow for this photon cannon. And this just pulls right on back for defense. Mothership core gets into position. A single observer comes out, and then just lots of sentries being morphed. A zealot. The first zealot of the game that's morphed is at 9:30, and we're still spending most of our minerals here. So this gas count is quite high at this point in time. Part of a temptation might be to say, okay, next time I do the build order, I'm not going to go 545 on these geysers. I'm going to go like 6, so this is a little bit more even, or maybe even 615. However, Feast has this build well planned out enough, because now he can actually go for another warp-in of 3 sentries, if need be, and still have enough gas to get the Colossus. And see, there's 300 gas right there.
Upgrade complete.
Really smart movement. Other little subtle things. This observer heading up here. This pylon planted over here, the Void Ray, scouting down the other alternative attack paths. This stuff only gets seen because this observer, which I thought was really, really great. Now, immediately, we have a really critical fact that we cannot leave at the table. As easy as it is to just begin promptly shitting yourself and go, oh, I don't want to lose, oh, God. To remember that at around the 10-minute mark, if he went for 3 base, then he can hit us with a lot of Ling Roach, but not a lot of high-tech. But he didn't go 3 hatch, so he's hitting us with a good amount of high-tech. There is no way physically possible for him to have a lot of drones. He has 21 here, and in his main base he has 15, and his expo he has 0. He's at 48. It's absolutely impossible. And the hidden thing that we saw all the minerals being dumped into are probes. Feast has like not missed a probe at all in this entire fight. Now one might say, well, what about Mutalisks? What if some sort of crazy swell of Mutalisks were thrown at us? Those Mutalisks can only really pop out at around, actually around now, at around 10 minutes. Actually, this third would be very difficult to even go down as early as it did if you went for Mutalisks. But in that sort of position, Feast already has the Stargate. This base is virtually defended because it has a cannon here, and there's enough time to build cannons. This base has cannons. Notice that this is good against Zerglings and Mutalisks because these cannons cover this and these buildings from the Mutalisks. Sentries are going to provide a little bit of assistance, but we have the Stargate to be able to deal with that. We also have the Mothership Core to do a photon overcharge at whatever weakened base we have. This is a very well thought out and careful defense. And look at that. The instant it finishes, it can immediately photon overcharge. And with the 20 damage that it does, it's basically a 4-shot. If you have some other units in the fight battling away, it's essentially a 4-shot. So there's a lot that goes on in this battle that I just think is kick-ass. In terms of the build order, certainly the combat side of things is kick-ass, but I'm going to leave open this production window. This is right when this battle ends up beginning. Still not missing a probe. Not a probe in sight being missed. The double zealot warping. Instantly Feast's money starts to pile up because if he selects his warp gates, he actually can't build out of any of them. They haven't yet charged in yet. So he begins adding on these extra gateways here. Very difficult to maintain that sort of focus unless you're a huge badass. And Feast is, of course, a huge badass. Preparing himself for that next phase. And while all this jazz is going down with this sort of micro, we see, wow, this Colossus really could not have come out any sooner. And even though this feels very barely, like very close, we get like a strong reality check with these two buildings going down. In this position, Feast has effectively a defended expansion. He has one Colossus, almost two Colossus out. And he's up against a Zerg that has literally 9 Hydras and that's it. And actually there's 2 Hydras here. Where are the rest of his units? Where on earth are his Hydralisks? I found them! I found the Hydras. Yeah, there's just like not that many. There's just not that many Zerg units on the field, and Zerg has no upgrades started, no tech, no nothing. Just a stellar defensive setup from Feast. And as we see, he just does this really nice micromanagement. No range on the Colossus yet. And this is a way of getting the Colossus count early, just to be able to stay alive. Because this range is not really needed until a big attack comes. So then right around 12 minutes, we see, okay, safety. And because Feast got all these buildings early, he can then just blast out all the upgrades for the big counter push. And I think I will stop here for part 2. Because all these gateways have gone up for Feast. I mean, to be able to stay alive, he has his Colossus Sentry. There's going to be a little bit more attacking from Bly, but I think it's pretty clear that it will not be particularly effective due to this Colossus count. In fact, there's a 3rd Colossus coming out. But not just defense, not just staying alive and getting just the right thing at just the right time, and wow, that Mothership Core almost has enough for another Photon Overcharge, but also there's going to be a very fast push. The instant this blink is done, which is basically going to be a little after 14 minutes, Feast has set himself up nicely. So when we come back in part 3, we're going to see that really nice attack, take some questions, and be done! And then I'm going to go play StarCraft, because I saw a cool build order from Feast today. Oh, and it's amazing! Yeah! On a break.